Ryan and I just played Shipwrights of the North Sea, the Redux edition. So this is a new edition of Shipwrights, and by new edition we mean mostly a completely new game. Thematically, it's similar.
And some of the very base mechanics carried over.
Very base.
Very base mechanics.
Very base. But they really approached this from the ground up to try to bring Shipwrights to the level of what you'd expect from the rest of their trilogies. Because I think when they originally did this, and there's actually a little bit in the rule book that talks about the history here and why they wanted to go back and do this. And I will say, this is another unique game for me. I never played the original. But when it comes to Garphill Games, all of their games, even in a trilogy, while they feel somewhat connected, also feel very different. This one's very different, certainly from Raiders of the North Sea.
It is different. I mean, it is different mechanically from Raiders of the North Sea, though it is thematically very similar, of course. It still takes place in that North Sea universe where you're building these long ships to go out and do raids. You're still recruiting townsfolk, building buildings. You're interacting with Jarls and bringing them into your clan. So a lot of the same things you're doing in Raiders of the North Sea, but done very different mechanically. The style of the game is incredibly different. But again, and I think I say this every single time we cover one of his games, I love that you can almost sit down, look at the cards, and if you've played his games before, you already have a pretty good idea of what everything does. I love that.
That is the connective thread for sure, is there's a lot of familiarity with the icons and the things that things do. This one thematically kind of centrals more so on your village. It's kind of like what you're doing. You're building ships. You're adding buildings to your village. The raids are probably the only thing, and those are like not a big part of this game that kind of extend outside the village, but even that focuses on what they're bringing back to the village.
Well, yeah, I like that idea that you're either raiding or trading effectively by building out these ships. Everything you do in this game, every ship you build, every building you build, and a lot of other things you do are going to move you up these different tracks. This is different. This is very different than what we had in the original Shipwrights. And also, it's now kind of, I don't want to say that it's completely solitaire, but the original game was very PvP, very. When you were raiding, you weren't just like carrying out raid cards. You were actually raiding your opponents, and you were like sabotaging your opponents and assassinating your opponents throughout the game. You're not doing any of that anymore, which for me is a big win.
Yeah, the only level of interaction here going on is there's a draft. But effectively, you're going to get 5 cards. You're going to choose 2. You're going to go through a process of drafting until you have 6 cards.
Yeah.
Each time we did it in a 2-player game, we were adding another card from the deck, and it was actually a nice 2-player draft, I think. Then with those cards, then you're doing what you want to do. And that's where this game kind of like blows wide open.
Oh yeah, you want to talk about multi-use cards.
Yeah, because you can discard cards straight out of your hand to get a thing. In fact, I think every card has that.
Every card has the ability to be discarded.
You just discard it to get a quick thing. And I think our first time I played, I thought, well, I don't want to be doing that too much because that seems not efficient. But you're going to be doing, like, discarding cards to get stuff is definitely what you're going to be doing. To be able to come out of the draft and go, oh, I have these 6 cards and I'm going to play them all perfectly and get exactly what I need is going to be a tricky thing.
Well, and I'll actually say this is, normally we do these just plays after one play. This is our second play because this really is, like David said, a puzzle game. It's an efficiency game, and I don't think we can say that we played very efficient games the first time we played, but we played much better, I think, our second game. And I think you will once you kind of grasp, okay, here's how you can use these cards. And if I do this, to get this, to play this building, then I can put a worker on this building to get these things. And then that's how I'll get to the end goal of where I want to be. Instead of just discarding every card for resources, you kind of start to learn how to manage them.
Yeah, and these cards aren't just being discarded and played in that way. All the cards have different things. So there's a very layered approach to what you're doing. You have a player board that has 5 spaces. On that board, you can put ships that will be built. That's kind of like where they're being built. Yeah, hopefully. And you can put craftsmen, which are character cards that you can, or villager cards that you can eventually sort of get rid of off your board, in order to contribute to the building of a ship, typically.
Yeah.
Those can also go under buildings that you've built below your board. When you build the ships, they go above your board. And then you're going to get cards and that you could slot under the ships. You're going to get other villagers and some of the craftsmen and even Jarls that you can get beneath your buildings.
Yep.
All of these things contribute to actions you're going to take. You can take workers from your supply, place them on actions that are on your board, but also on cards that you're adding to the board. Like, it really becomes this intricate engine of things that you can do to get done what you need to get done. And at the end of the day, every round has a different economy of like what you can spend some of your silver to get in terms of the resources, wood, wool, and iron from the main supply, not to mention gold, and least of all not to mention the workers, because the workers, they're going to go, when you spend them, they go away, and you're going to need those workers back to fire off some of those actions.
Yeah, and the last thing that's new that I think is really cool are these hero cards. And there are 3 hero cards for these 3 different tracks. And these can give you some really powerful abilities. But this aspect of the game is kind of a race. Whoever's the highest on these tracks gets these cards. And if somebody passes you, the card moves to them at the end of the round. So you could really be building a synergy that really uses one of these card powers, and then somebody else sees that, and so they just had to race up that track and take it from you.
Yeah, kind of a king of the hill sort of thing.
So these are really powerful, and there's a lot of decisions that you have to make. So I want to jump right into, because what I have to say, I think, really leans into who this game is for.
Yeah.
Because we've said the word efficiency puzzle a lot in this video, or talked about that, and it really is. There's so many decisions you're making every single round. David mentioned, for one, those craftsmen. It's a really good idea to put your craftsmen under your buildings so that they contribute their skills to your village over time. You could use them on every building, or you could put a craftsman, in your tableau and use them once. So it seems like it's a good idea, but then you realize I can only have 1 person per building. Every craftsman that's under here means I'm not getting a Jarl, and Jarl's moving up these tracks, or it means I'm not putting a townsfolk under there to make the action even better. And you might be really tempted to fill your buildings with townsfolk so all those buildings are better, and then you realize that you don't have any craftsmen in your village.
Right.
So it's such a balancing act.
And all the actions that you're spending to do some of those things can distract you from doing what you need to do to score some points too, because as you know, I'm a player who likes, I've built all these buildings, and look how awesome these buildings are at what these buildings do.
Yeah.
But if you're not going to utilize and pivot to using those buildings so that they can contribute to the building of the ships, which is where the real points are. There are some points on some of the buildings, but the real points come from the ships. We've got ships up here, 5, 6, 10, 6 points, where my buildings down here are 2, 1, 1, and 1. Now, some of the buildings will contribute to going up these tracks, but that's really also where the ships are too. Now, these tracks are going to get you points potentially.
It's tough
in our
to get
2
to the
games,
top.
Ryan did it once, and he got 1 point from one of the tracks. But you can only get 1, 2, 4, or 7 if you max out a track. And to max out a track, I have to imagine you'll either have to very strategically focus on the ships you're building, or just get lucky at the ships you're building. Because one of the last things I'm looking at is what the ships are giving me on the track. I'm looking, how soon can I build this thing, and am I able to build this thing?
Well, you got to balance all of that. And that's why I say I think people that like that timing puzzle are going to really like this game, because these ships don't just give you points. Some of them give you income. So if you build income buildings early, you're building a foundation to get a lot of income. Some of these give you extra points at the end of the game for fulfilling objectives or having specific things. And again, like David said, pivoting is so important. Like, I had a engine that was giving me a ton of coins. David had an engine that was giving him a ton of workers. You have to then try to figure out how to spend all that, right? Or else you're just wasting actions, producing a bunch of coins or producing a bunch of workers that you can't really use.
Yeah, I have a bunch of workers from the end of our last game, because in our first game we realized, workers. So in typical fashion, I looked, the first cards I got, I was like, that one gives me workers? Okay. Here's another one that gives me workers. I am not going to be cut short on the worker game.
You definitely weren't.
And I won the worker game. If the game was workers, I win.
Yeah.
But the game is points, and I lost. So it is an efficiency puzzle, and I'll say that's sort of a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that efficiency puzzle. I do think I'll probably find myself on the short end of the stick playing with the likes of Ryan and certainly Emily when it comes to efficiency puzzles, because I do think this is a game that could end up being maybe a little lopsided with varied degrees of experience, various degrees of gamers at the table, because there's a lot going on. And that's also going to lead me to one of the things that I think would suggest this might not be for you. All those things going on can lead to a lot of situations where people are taking their turn, like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. Oh, actually, this would let me do that. So I'm going to take that back and rewind a little things. Combine that with the fact that you're supposed to play this simultaneously. And in fact, I would go so far as to say if you're playing this with more than 2 players, you absolutely should be playing.
Yeah. Just
the
like
game
Hadrian's Wall.
It's a lot like Hadrian's Wall in that respect because there's so much going on. And that's so satisfying, but there's so much going on that I think there's a lot of room there for potential mistakes.
Yeah.
And if you're a gamer, I'll tell you this 100%. If you're a gamer who doesn't like sitting at the table with people and everything's going on, and after it's done, you look around and you're like, how did these people do what they did? Because we were all playing simultaneously. Can I trust that they didn't make any mistakes?
Right.
Blah, blah. If you freak out about that sort of stuff, you're probably going to freak out about that in this game a little bit.
And it is very tempting, I mean, not to cheat on purpose, but it is very tempting to you're doing your actions, and then like David said, you stop and you go, oh, I had this worker spot. I just spent all this money to get these sheep, and I had a worker spot that would have just given them to me. I should have done that. Let me get my sheep back. Let me get my money back. And then you forget, oh, I bought those sheep at a discount from over here, and you take more money than you should have.
Yeah.
Or, you realize, oh, but I hadn't built that building. Like, there's just all these things that, like, because your turns, you do so much on your turns. It does actually feel a bit like Hadrian's Wall in that constant exchange of like,
100%.
do this to get this, and all the buildings you build give you rewards, and the raid cards give you rewards, and there's trade cards you can get that give you rewards, and there's some areas that you can hit on this yellow track that upgrade your things. So maybe you didn't have access to that thing, and you're halfway through your turn and realizing, oh wait, why didn't I use this building? And it was because maybe you hadn't upgraded it. But then you're thinking, well, shoot, I didn't make the most efficient action. I want to go back and fix that. And then what do? Stop the game. Hey, everybody, I need to go back and fix this thing. Or like, it's just, you got to fight that urge to want to like go back and correct your inefficient plays. And if
be on top of it. Or
just be really on top
of it. Because when it comes, and I think that it's not really this game specifically, but games that are simultaneous and have a lot of things that make players prone to like wanting to, oh, actually, I'm going to rewind a little bit on my turn and do this. Obviously, when you're rewinding a little thing on your turn, like, oh, I could have done this instead and it's cheaper for me, and no one's paying attention, there's got to be a lot of trust at the table.
There definitely has to.
First of all.
Well, any simultaneous game. And if you know what, if you're playing with people that you think are going to take advantage of that,
well, then just find another group if that's the case.
Maybe you should be, but it is easy to make mistakes. And if you're the kind of person that's going to like be watching other people and be like, well, wait, that bothers me that you did that wrong. And it's going to...
And we all, let's be honest, everyone feels that way from time to time.
And it's like, what did you do? Just stop the whole game and be like, hold on, I watched, you did that wrong.
Yeah, what did you do?
Get 2 coins, not 3 or whatever. But, I mean, that's the balance of a simultaneous game, of any type of game. I mean, I can't say it enough. This really does feel like, obviously this was designed after Hadrian's Wall, but they kind of had that same ethos of like, let's just give you a ton of stuff to do on your turn constantly.
And it is interesting. I want to stress this because we have talked about, even off camera, the correlation to Hadrian's Wall. This isn't Hadrian's Wall.
No.
This doesn't play anything like Hadrian's Wall, but the buttons that get pushed when Hadrian's Wall, when you're like taking stuff and exchanging stuff and like, oh, I got this and now I can use this to buy this and that gives me this. There is a ton of that here as well, so it feels very tactile, in a tactile way, very much that way, because I'm going to spend 2 coins to get these rocks, and I'm going to spend those, or the iron to do this. It's very fun, very exciting, but it's a lot going on at the table on every given turn.
It definitely is. I mean, personally, I'll say from 2 plays, I found a lot of satisfaction when you just figure it out and you're like, oh, I'm short 1 stone, and you look at your hand and go, oh, wait a minute, this guy gets me 2 coins. Right now, stone only costs 2 coins. You figure that puzzle out. It's like that light bulb moment going off, and you get a lot of those moments where you might stare at your tableau for like, a minute and then go, oh, I see it. I see my path. And that's a really good feeling.
Yeah, to take that a step further, I think what the example I would give that would communicate, I think, how I feel about this game is it has those efficiency puzzles that you can solve like that in multiple ways, but what it does is you're looking at that hand, and you might need a stone, but you're also looking at a card, oh, I can discard this to get the stone.
Yeah.
But you might not want to do that because it's probably not. But if you're one of those players where you're like, oh, there is the stone, I will get the stone now, easy, you might have done that, you might have got the stone, but it's probable that it might not have been the most efficient way to do it.
And I think that's the last thing I want to say when we're talking about if you would know if this game is for you or not. Because if you can have a turn where you're like, I want to build this ship, and I'm going to discard 5 cards from my hand, and I'm going to build 1 ship. Meanwhile, your opponent is like, I'm going to build this building and use this worker and get all this stuff. Like, your turn could be over, and you're like, well, how are you guys still going? And it's because you just dumped your whole hand for its bonuses, and you didn't, and that.
Yeah, and it's very short term versus like working all of that out.
Yeah.
And I would say that too lends itself, if you're a solo player out there, I think this game is great for that.
Oh,
I think
yeah, that's a good point.
Efficiency puzzles in general lend themselves well to solo play. There is a solo mode, we haven't played it, but I would think the efficiency puzzle going on here, and there should be a drinking game for efficiency puzzle as much as we've said it, is going to be very satisfying for a solo play. And I think even for 2 players, I think what's his play up? 4 probably?
I think up to 4, yeah.
That's going to be a lot going on at the table at once. So just be prepared to play your game and not worry too much about what everyone else is doing.
In a good way, though. I mean, we do stress those things because you don't want to get into this game with the wrong idea. But for me, it's another hit from Garphill Games. Like I've liked every game in their Compass series or whatever they're called. I think that's what they're calling it now. I've liked every game, and I'm really, really glad to see this Redux treatment. It makes me want to play Shipwrights more.
Last thing, super fast.
Oh, well, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Some of the turns can get big, but the game plays very quickly. I think we played our second game in less than 45 minutes?
It's five rounds and simultaneous.
It's 5 rounds and it goes pretty quick. It does build, and some of the later rounds go a little bit longer because you've kind of gotten used to and you've got more things that you can do on your board. But yeah, it's a very fast game. If you have any questions about this very fast game, make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.